participants in the room. You can see it's starting to fill up more and more. So I think we get underway in the name of time. Today is such a great topic that we're talking about, which is creating fair and transparent and rewarding relationships in the workplace. And I don't think this conversation could be more timely. With Gia, hot topic at the moment, fresh off the heels of this, the talk about transparency and relationships and trust. It's one of the points that's obviously going to be pretty foundational to today's kind of topic and discussion, but certainly not the only thing we're focusing on. It's a really broad spectrum, a really broad range of elements that come together to create a trusted and trusted environment. And we've got some great speakers today. We've got Matt McFarlane, previously of Oyster, and now starting up his own company, Foundation. He'll talk to us a little bit about compensation, culture, talent, everything that he's learned on his journey. We've also got Jess Balcom, who comes from Mercer, obviously going to support with some amazing insights, global trends, and really give us some understanding of what's happening in that workforce and how important transparency really is. We want to talk a little bit today about some of the challenges as well that we all face in terms of being able to create these environments. As always, very easy to talk about, sometimes a lot more difficult to actually put into practice and make it a success. So it's going to be a great conversation. A little bit of housekeeping for everybody. There is a Q&A button down the bottom. We will be monitoring it. Please feel free to throw your questions in there. We'll cut to the panelists. We'll try and get answers for everything for you. There will be a Q&A session at the end. But I think these things are usually more fun if they come up throughout the conversation and we can see them in the way that we discuss. But we're going to kick off by passing over to Jess. Jess is going to do an intro for us and show us some really interesting stats to help frame the conversation. So Matt and I are going to go off screen. We'll hand over to Jess and we'll see you in 5 or 10 minutes. Thanks, Jess. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Damien. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. So my name is Jess and I'm part of the Workforce Solutions team at Mercer. So I've been with Mercer team now for over 7 years, working closely with our digital and insights clients to make data-driven decisions about their people. And now I lead up our solution development area, working with our clients to innovate their people problems. So inspiring and informing the work that we do in this space is Mercer's global talent trends. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share some of the findings with you all today, as the report was actually released last night, local time. So it's hot off the press. This is the 9th year of Mercer's signature global talent trends, and we do love acronyms. So from here forth, we'll call it the GTT. So the GTT research explores current and emerging trends impacting the world of work. And what makes this study so powerful is that we actually collect data from multiple perspectives. So we're getting a really holistic view of what's happening in the world of work. So we heard from C-suite executives, HR leaders, individual employees, and this year we had the voice of investors as well. So truly holistic view of market conditions. So first up, I'd like to share a snapshot of the context behind this year's GTT. We are on the cusp of a revolution in how we work and how we live. What's taken us to this point will not take us beyond. Human and machine teaming is accelerating at an unprecedented rate, and it's clear that we're now well and truly past the inflection point, with 1 in 4 executives saying that AI will fundamentally change their business model. This year, executives told us that they're most concerned about inflation, digital acceleration, and the rise of alternative or distributive work models. As we usher in an age of human and machine teaming, we need to place people at the center of our transformation efforts. With data and technology, we now have the opportunity to deliver a more intuitive and simplified, customized work experience. And focusing on how to keep our people and our business and our societies thriving in the years to come is going to be an imperative as we navigate the risks and opportunities ahead of us. Executives are placing a premium on agility, but they're doing so in a way that keeps sustainability of work practices and talent models very much in focus. And in fact, 70% of investors confirm that the area of operation that they're most interested in is people sustainability. So it's front and foremost in the decision-making process for executives and investors alike. So that's a bit of the market context. And just to give you a snapshot of who we actually heard from this year, the study is the culmination of over 12,000 voices across 17 markets and 16 industries. So across the 845 C-suite executives, on average, they're predicting 15% growth in 2024, despite only 1 in 3 of them feeling that they have the right talent models in place to meet this demand. When we spoke to HR leaders, 1 in 2 say that their top workforce challenge that will impact the business the most this year is rising labour costs. And so being able to attract and retain talent while balancing this with cost is going to be critical, especially as 3 out of 10 employees plan to leave their job in the next 12 months. So reviewing the data from across all of these voices this year, 4 trends emerged. The need to drive human-centric productivity was number 1. So 98% of companies are planning a transformation in 2024, largely driven by the need to increase workforce productivity. So executives expect AI to increase their productivity by 20 to 35%. Yet the majority of the executives that we heard from believe that their workforce cannot adapt to this new world of work. So by introducing AI by itself, it's not enough. There needs to be an intentional, human-centric approach to work design in order to really optimize the benefits of any AI. And we see leading organizations increasingly focused on internal reskilling efforts and putting assessment and flow to work models in place to achieve this. The next trend that we found was boosting the corporate immune system. So executives see their greatest near-term risk as failure to adopting AI. But we're living in a heightened risk environment. And another people risk for business is that 8 out of 10 Australian employees feel that they are at risk of burnout this year. 8 out of 10 is quite staggering. And the top risk factors leading to this feeling of burnout is financial strain, work overload, and feeling overwhelmed by too many technology tools. So there's definitely this paradox between AI being there to increase productivity, but also a need to do it in a human-centric way to reduce people feeling even further overloaded. So those are the top factors leading to people feeling at risk of burnout. But amongst the top 3 reasons why employees say will make a difference to their well-being are programs to help people talk about difficult topics, highlighting a shifting employee expectation to needing and wanting to have more open dialogue about key issues, which I think is really critical for our conversation today. The next trend we found was cultivating a digital-first culture. So one key thing to note here is that digital is not just technology. It's how humans and technology come together, adding new value, not just automation. So for HR, this translates to how we can deliver services that feel personal and individualized, but they can be delivered at scale. And what we know is that resilient organizations are almost 2 times more likely to cultivate a digital-first culture. And employees working in an organization that is a digital-first culture feel more psychologically safe, have a positive attitude towards work, they're more likely to be thriving and show a lower intent to leave. So as we're thinking about this, and for today's discussion, there's just a couple of points to draw attention to, some commonality across these trends. So there's a lot of transformation and change on the agenda, whether it's for productivity or culture shifts. And there's a need to actively engage employees to achieve this transformation. There's also a need to boost the resilience of the organisation and to take active steps to mitigate against people risks, including meeting the employee expectations for open dialogue about tough topics. And to successfully navigate these changes and boost resilience, it's critical to foster a climate of trust and equity. And in fact, when investors were polled about which trend would have the biggest impact on corporate evaluations this year, it was anchoring to trust and equity as the most significant factor. Equity in ensuring people believe that their rewards is fair is pivotal for executives and investors as part of sustainable people practices. And pay transparency is one component of this. So let's deep dive into this a little bit more. I'm sure everyone would agree that all aspects of life over the last couple of years have felt very uncertain, and they feel like they're changing rapidly, whether it's geopolitically, economically, environmentally, or technologically. So organisations need to find a balance between remaining adaptable and flexible to respond to these market changes and events, with the need to continue to provide with employees with clarity to generate confidence in the future vision of the organisation. So when things are shifting, we need the energy and commitment of people to continue to work through the uncertainty. And if we can't give people pure clarity, then we need to make sure that we have their trust to get them to stay the course. What you can see here on slide at the moment is we did a principal component analysis on our employee data sets, and trust came out as the greatest indicator of their intent to stay, engagement more generally, as well as people's sense of thriving. So what we saw through the pandemic was that there was a big shift and increase in trust in organisations. But as we can see on the right here, the trust in organisations has actually dropped 10 to 15 percentage points in every dimension. So when we couple this with employees telling us that they're not entirely happy, but they do intend to stay, there's a risk for organisations of stagnancy. We then asked employees the question of what corporate behaviours diminish the trust that they have. And the 5 top areas were broken promises, frequent organisation changes, unfair treatment, not delivering on sustainability, and a lack of recognition. So if these the behaviours that are eroding trust, what actually makes employees stay? Job security is always number one. But this year, what we saw is that fair pay has jumped to the next influencer. So previously, this was 4th, but it's moved up to 2, knocking off flexible working. And importantly, fair pay is not competitive pay, which you can see is factor 6. Fair pay is about people understanding and believing in the equity and the fairness of how their pay and contribution is measured. So for employees, a big part of feeling value at work is knowing that the decisions are being made transparent and in an equitable way. I mean, few decisions matter more to people than how they are actually being paid at work. Cost of living pressures and easier access to salary data as well through things like Glassdoor and PayScale, they're all making more people question whether they are in fact being paid fairly. People want to understand how decisions are made and how their contributions are being recognised. And these market conditions, as well as generational norms, are putting pay on the table for discussion. And so pay transparency is fast becoming an expectation, and it's backed by legislative requirements, such as the WGEA reporting that came out last week, and changes to the Fair Work Act in December 2022, banning pay secrecy in employment contracts. One further interesting point when we looked at why employees actually stay is that there's been a very significant decline in the influence of people's individual manager. So in 2022, the relationship with a manager was rated as number 12 as reasons to stay, but this year it's actually dropped to the very bottom of the list. So what this is indicating is that employees now see a direct relationship with their organisation, not just a manager. And employees are increasingly judging organisations on their stated value, societal impact, and the fair treatment of themselves as well as others. So the DE&I agenda is evolving as well because of this. And 1 in 3 employees actually report that they expect organisations and their leaders to be held accountable for the outcomes of DE&I, not just setting targets. So if we just reflect back on those corporate behaviours which employees say erode their trust, broken promises, unfair or unequal treatment, and a lack of recognition. Employees really expect organisations to walk the talk, and increasingly leading organisations are embedding DE&I in their everyday employee experience. And if we think about specifically how this relates to pay transparency, employees who are thriving are 2 times more likely to say that their organisation makes fair and equitable pay and promotion decisions. And we can see here on the right-hand side that there has been a shift towards more organisations delivering on pay transparency in their job postings as well. So really establishing an equitable and transparent start to the relationship with employees. So this is what we're seeing from the global talent trends. Yet when we look on the WGEA disclosures released last week, actually only 25% of organisations are including transparency about their pay scales within their internal gender pay gap policies. So there's still a way to go, but there's lots of opportunity for organisations to take action that will have an impact straight away. I'm super eager to jump into today's discussion with Damien and Matt, and there's lots of takeaways from the GTT study around trust and equity, but I just wanted to highlight 3 things. So 1, people risks are increasingly business risks, and managing pay fairness is a critical part of ensuring the equity and the feelings of trust. Talking about big issues and support for doing this is a growing trend amongst employees as well. So they're putting equity and pay on the table for discussion, and they expect it to be addressed. And thirdly, transparency in pay outcomes and processes can be a powerful tool to boost employee trust and engagement. So for more details about trust and equity or the GTT study more broadly, please do visit the Mercer website for a copy of the report and to register for some of our upcoming webinars and Australian-specific insights. But with that, I will stop sharing and reconnect with Damien and Matt.
Thank you so much, Jess. Some really incredible insights there, particularly interested in that relationship shift between the manager importance and how that's now being broadly attached to the total organisation. It's a big shift from the mindset that I've always understood about, retention and that relationship importance to direct manager levels.
I know. I mean, everyone's heard that adage, you don't leave a job, you leave a manager. But it's completely shifted to a much broader view and connection with the organisation as well, which can actually be really powerful.
Yeah, especially if you get it right, and probably doubly so if you're not getting it so right, which is yeah, a bit of a topic of the conversation today. And look, I'm gonna tackle the elephant in the room straight away and just go to WGEA. This is a little bit of a watershed moment, I think, for Australia in terms of the first cut of public data around the discrepancy in terms of the pay gap that we're seeing, and I guess what it brings it back to is a sense of what are some of the practical things that companies can think about implementing to maybe avoid making these, being in this position. I think is probably the right way to put it. And I might just throw it to Matt, because you've seen both sides of the coin, right, Matt? You're consulting now, and you've also been in the hot seat yourself. So tell us a little bit about what do you think some of the practical steps are people should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, we're in such a formative stage with WGEA's release of the gender pay gap. A lot of organizations can kind of rest easy. I don't think a lot of people, or certainly not a lot of workforces, are expecting everyone to have things perfect from day one. And so the first sort of practical tip I'd encourage a lot of organizations to take that, as Jess said in the stats, they're not yet doing, is just start to take some ownership over what that number looks like. Really start to speak internally to what your pay gap is, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. But I think acknowledging first and foremost whether or not you even have an issue, and in particular some of the things that you're wanting to take to some of the steps you're wanting to take to drive action and change in that environment. I think speaking to transparency more broadly, some of the practical things, a lot of companies balk at the concept of having something like a pay philosophy or a pay strategy be internally transparent. But for so many organizations, they're already doing a lot of the things that are traditionally captured within a pay strategy document. They're just not necessarily written down anywhere. So I think, arming yourself with some key facts around how you do pay already within your organization. So how often do we review it, for example? Save people having to wonder, how often or how do we compare ourselves to the market? What does the market look like for us? Prevent people from feeling like they need to compare themselves to an organization that has no relationship to yours necessarily, so that they understand the basis upon which you're starting to make these pay decisions. I think it can be very easy for a lot of organizations to hear the word pay transparency and immediately jump to the example that you see in the media with Buffer, where they've got internal and external transparency of all of their roles. It doesn't have to be that extreme from the get-go. So a really great place to start is just documenting what you already do and making that available for your people, through onboarding, through your manager training, and empowering them to understand how pay is orchestrated in your organization. And I think, speaking to my time internally, the burden that takes off your people team in terms of having to field those queries through that HR inbox, or if you've got a ticketing system or whatever that might be, you're now reducing a lot of that workload on your team because you've been upfront about it. Maybe you're not releasing salaries to individuals just yet, but you're very clear about how you treat pay internally, and those are worlds of benefit to your people team.
Yeah, certainly not accidentally sharing your Excel spreadsheet with all of the internal salary bands that your CFO sends to the wrong person. I've heard that story more than once. I think, this thing with maybe a bit of data and a source of truth is also interesting, but I think there's a greater kind of conversation as well that maybe stem from the WGEA point that I'm interested in as well is, is there a conversation to be had about access to more senior roles? Is that some of the imbalance that we're seeing as well, that more senior people tend to lean male, and that's what's causing such a big rift? Or maybe there's different types of roles, sales roles. I struggle to find really great female account executives, but that's a really big commissionable component of their pay. Is this some of the stuff that we need to consider as well when we're thinking about pay gaps and pay transparency as the shape of the workforce and the seniority between different sexes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it comes back to how you're going to own that stat. What are the things that are in place at the moment that are working? What are some of the things that you want to experiment with? So if it's a case of there just aren't candidates in the market that are going to help even out some of those stats, how are you developing that talent internally? Or, the two big pieces, I guess, that are barriers to women entering into those senior roles. One is flexibility. Have you recently gone from a fully remote workforce back to the office? that can be a real barrier for access. How do you treat things like parental leave? A lot of parents don't come back to the workforce. So these, the motherhood penalty, I think it's referred to. These are very real things that you know, you need to consider in your practices. And I think, again, being upfront about them with your organization and recognizing when you're getting it right, but also when you're not, and then the steps you want to take to remedy that immediately creates a sense of clarity. And especially if you start to keep yourself accountable to it, you know, a sense of consistency, and those two things are very, you know, enormous contributors to a sense of trust and then engagement and so on. But I'm sure Jess has some contribution there as well.
Yeah, no, Matt, I totally agree. And just picking up on your point you made earlier about organizations actually diving into what their pay equity, like, or their WGEA results might have actually shown them as well. So doing things like internal labor maps to truly understand, you know, is it just representation at certain levels that is impacting our overall values? Or if we dig into that further, is it particular job families, like Damien, to your point about account executives differ to the admin population, for example, but actually organizations taking that next level of analysis to understand truly what might be driving these inequities, and not just exploring, not just leaving it at the data level, but also then using that data to initiate a conversation with folks that might be in that kind of population where they're dropping out, to understand what else you could be doing to support them to come back. So it might be flexible work. And I think, you know, a lot of organizations have done a lot of great work with their parental leave and their flexible working to make it easier for people to come back from parental leave breaks. But increasingly what we're hearing about is at the upper end of the organization, where there tends to be more older workers, is people with parental care responsibilities as well. So they're in that real sandwich generation of having elder care as well as children care. And so their requirements for flexibility could be totally different to someone who has like school drop off in the afternoon, for example. So using the analysis to highlight who you might go and engage in deeper conversations is another great win for organizations too.
Yeah, great point, Jess. And I'm going to stick with you because I want to expand the conversation into, you know, how do you actually build fair and rewarding relationships in the workplace? Maybe there's some insights from the latest report that you've just pulled together that you can share with us. I think maybe some practical tips on, you know, you mentioned trust. It's a big part of a lot of managers' conversations, right? Is how do we build trust? And how do we, you know, build a rewarding relationship with the people that we're in the room with? Maybe you can share some practical insights for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do get overexcited by data, so I'll try not to go too detailed into that. But one of the points that I actually kind of jumped out to me is that when we looked at employee results this year compared to 2022, employees this year felt 2 times more likely to say that they were replaceable in the workplace. And I think that really presents, well, I mean, a bit of a wake-up call for organizations to understand that their employees might be feeling undervalued, especially because we know that that's one of the elements that can erode trust from a corporate behaviours perspective. But I think part of it is a lack of recognition, but also I think that there's some rising anxiety, not just because of transformation and change that's coming, but also because AI is now coming into all workforces in some way, shape or form. And some people might not be feeling confident about what that means for themselves. So I think the upside opportunity for organizations is to use this opportunity to be transparent about what the changes might mean for their workforce, but also use this as part of their reskilling efforts for employees as well, which has the upside of showing that there's investment in employees for their own future potential, which is a reward, and also one of the factors that employees say keeps them with their employer for longer. So it's a win-win scenario and a partnership that is really for the benefit of both. Yeah.
Some great insights. Matt, anything you want to add to the building trusting and rewarding relationships piece and what you've seen work?
Yeah, something that stood out to me from the report, and I'm excited to dive into it after after this as well in a bit more detail, is just understanding, you mentioned tough topics and that the companies really need to be able to start tackling them. And I think pay is now no longer, well, it may still be a tough topic, but it's now no longer a taboo topic. And it's one of those things that, especially with an emerging generation that are coming into a workforce where, they're watching videos on TikTok of people literally being asked what they earn in the street. This conversation is so normal for these people. But the proliferation as well of online data, it's starting to even out that traditional power imbalance between who has access to market insights. So, people are coming more and more armed with an understanding of what the person next to them is earning or what those in their industry or their role are earning. And I think it's starting to create this kind of impetus behind the conversation for organizations to then, open the curtain and share how it is that they come to terms with their own pay practices and make sure that they're justifying them more and more. And so, the fact that I think it was 2.9% or 2.9 times more likely to work for a paycheck is astounding. If that's such an attractor and a retainer of your people, you need to be able to help them understand how that paycheck stacks up against the competitor down the street or within the industry. How do you reward performance through it? All of these things, and again, that increase in transparency only work to boost transparency and trusting relationships within your organization.
Yeah,
I do love this. Sorry, go Jess.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think something that keeps resonating through what we're saying and a good call out is that it's transparency around the decision-making process and the amount of analysis and care and thoughtfulness that goes into pay decisions, not necessarily, 60,000 compared to 61,000. That's less meaningful and has less impact for people than understanding that they're being heard and that they're being valued fairly and equitably.
Really interesting insights. I always wonder as well when these reports come out, when you think about what's happening in the greater macro environment, you mentioned just living expenses are through the roof. I saw something phenomenal the other day in the paper that to afford an average house in Sydney, New South Wales, you have to earn $219,000. How these macro and like we see rifts happening everywhere and, uncertainty, and how does this start to shape the way that people are feeling about their employees and what that relationship looks like. So looking forward to diving in as well. I'm gonna throw back to Matt, because Matt, you've got a wealth of experience locally and globally building compensation frameworks, which I think is a fairly interesting part of what you do, and you can lend some real insight here. I'm kind of interested to understand about how you started to implement that program. What are the foundations of having that conversation and implementing something that's structured rather than just, hey, we've got a great candidate, we want to pay them 20% more than the last candidate that we just hired, which I'm sure we've all experienced in our time. So maybe you could share some insight there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all seen the cowboy hiring, haven't we? That's a lot of companies and a lot of heads of people or chief people officers, by not taking some of these steps to document and build these structures, they don't give themselves and they don't arm themselves with the ability to really partner with a leader to have the conversation around some of those tactics. But I touched on it a little bit earlier. So many companies, everyone pays their employees. They have to. It's a legal right. So I think that the point to start from is just writing down what it is that you're doing now and getting it in a central place, and then starting to ask the questions behind why you do it that way. I mean, a lot of companies will start from the perspective of, we found some data, we pay mid-market because we don't want to be those people that pay, less than 50th percentile, but we don't necessarily want the financial burden of going above. And so that tends to be the catalyst of a lot of comp philosophies that a company will have. And then they start to build on things from there. Maybe we do a review every year. Maybe we bought this data last year, but we're going to buy that data next year. Starting to document some of this stuff and then question the why behind why you're doing it. And in particular with a lens towards the strategy and the culture that you have as well. Why, are we trying to hire, and I'll pick something from tech industry, if we're trying to hire machine learning engineers, the salaries are skyrocketing at the moment. AI is a hot topic. Very few people have, experience with it at the moment. It's probably changing on a quarterly basis, which in Australia, quarterly, compensation reviews are almost unheard of. But to hold on to your people, that might be necessary versus others who have a much more stable salary. So I think just asking some of those questions behind why you're doing what you're doing. And then I mentioned the cultural element as well. So there's organizations that have trust and these sorts of things baked into their values. You need to understand how you convey that through practices like this. So if you do say trust and is a value of yours, go and speak to your people and understand from them what that looks like in the realm of compensation as well. Are they expecting a buffer-like environment? They rarely are, by the way. Like, there's so much data out there to suggest that a lot of people aren't wanting to know the precise figure for everybody else. But again, they want to understand how you come to the solution that you're coming to when it comes to pay. And so I think that's a really great place to start, is just getting that documented and starting to question it. But then where it really starts to turn into a more, I guess, commercial tool and a more structured tool is through things like job level. So ensuring that you've got a framework through which to define the kind of roles that you have. You now suddenly have an ability to actually build a plan around, okay, we're growing, we need this kind of skill set. And you've also got an ability to then go to market and compare apples and apples. So here's what we're looking for when we say machine learning engineer, and here's what exists in the market and what that sort of thing can cost. All those sorts of things are great steps towards, getting a compensation framework in place, whether that's for one country or 100 countries, really.
So it's clearly a fairly sizable program, right? There's a lot of work in getting this right. So what can you talk about in terms of, the outcome at the end? What's the impact to engagement and to culture when you get this right? Have you seen it shift the dynamics of a workplace pretty significantly?
Yeah, I think there's myriad different things. I mean, the focus of this is obviously trust. I think, a recent example of a customer who or a client where we worked through this over a 12-month period, they saw it was a 15% increase in their rewards and recognition driver within their engagement score and a 10% overall engagement boost. Now, engagement is made up of a lot of things, so obviously there's other contributors, but to see that kind of jump, through a lot of these paid transparency practices was really impressive. I think engagement is great, and that's one thing. The other benefit that this kind of work can give to your organization is the productivity. So you imagine a recruiter who's trying to hire, a bunch of different roles. If they've got the information and the basis behind why we pay what we pay in front of them, and they can make those decisions quickly, suddenly that really takes the limiter off your recruiting team. I think if you're doing pay reviews internally as well, having this structure systematically established is only going to make a lot of those sorts of decisions and practices much faster as well. So there's a real acceleration of that side of things as well.
Yeah, amazing. Any insights there, Jess? What are your thoughts? What have you seen? Is there anything in the data that tells us about when you get this right, how does it impact culture? How does it impact engagement and retention rates?
Definitely. I mean, as Matt said, it definitely bolsters engagement levels. And I think the other piece to this is that if you have people who trust and stay the course with the organization, it means that you're less likely to have a lot of unnecessary turnover and churn and burn, which then has the downstream effect of, productivity lulls as people get up to speed, and then the rest of the team feeling overburdened because they're picking up the excess while you find someone and then get them up to speed. So there's less disruption to the workflow as well. And I think people who are happy at work and who are thriving, they're also giving you their best, and they're bringing themselves as the best version of themselves to work as well, which has upsides for their personal productivity.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Jess, I'm interested from you, like the benefits of having trusted relationships with employees, and maybe beyond just the employee to manager relationship now and into the greater organization, knowing that you trust that organization and they trust you. There's pretty obvious benefits to it, right? And we've talked about them a little bit today: engagement, productivity, retention, general overall well-being within the organization, probably a decrease in stress. I'm really interested for you to maybe give us some insights on what your thoughts are that company, because not every company gets this right. So for companies that don't feel like they're getting this right at the moment, that struggle with getting it right, maybe there's some tips that you can give in terms of like, how do you start seeding trust between yourselves, the organization, and the employee base?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's actually 3 factors that make up a trusted relationship. So it's benevolence, which is, I believe that you will do the right thing by me. Competence, so trusting people know what they're doing. And then the third one is integrity, which is actions will follow words. So if we think about trust in that construct, it kind of helps to then focus on the activities that are going to help build each of those factors, because it's not just having one or doubling down on another one of these. It's actually to have trust, you need all three of these elements. So it's ensuring things like pay and promotion processes are fair and free from bias. So as we've been talking about so far, but also something for us to be more mindful of, especially as we're adopting AI into many of these processes, and what are the extra steps we need to take to make sure that there is no unconscious bias in those decisions. Delivering transparency. So again, we've been talking about that today. So redesigning HR processes and policies, but most importantly, communication about those policies that really emphasize the impact of transparency. And I think also listening to employees and what they want as well. This doesn't have to be a full engagement survey. It can be digital focus groups. It can be making a cup of tea in the kitchen and just checking in with someone, or virtually if you're doing virtual coffees, or even just doing quick pulse surveys as well, just to really listen to what's going to move the needle and have an impact on your employees. And when they say trust or transparency, what does that actually mean for them? And how can you engage with them on that conversation?
Yeah, it's a great point. What were the three points? Benevolence,
benevolence, integrity, and competence.
Like that. Is that covered in the report? I think I'm going to read into that one a little bit. I like a new.
Definitely double clicking on that. Yeah.
Yeah, as well. A large conversation I have with a lot of people in leadership is like the need to be able to lead with context, which I think was a point that you made earlier, Jess, in other words, which was, you got to give people rationale for decision making and context behind why the decision was made, rather than the old way of just telling people how things are. That no longer really flies. You need to be able to sit down and really kind of bring people along for the journey. And I think that the points you made there refer to that quite well. Matt, what about you? Obviously, both sides of the fence. You've seen it externally as a consultant. You've seen it internally in-house. What are some of the effective ways to build trust with that employee base?
Yeah, I think, I love the term benevolence. I think one example of a way I've seen a company integrate this is, how can you set something like this, which is clearly a really important topic to your people? How can you enshrine it within things like company goals? So, for example, if you do have established pay practices, how can you keep yourself accountable to their accuracy in terms of processes like hiring, or through compensation review cycles as well, to ensure that you're maintaining things like pay equity, and you've just got a beat on those sorts of areas that are important to people. Another one is, again, this is another example of transparency that doesn't go, all the way out to blow all the details out of the water of everyone's pay. Is things like, be accountable to processes like compensation reviews. They're usually such a black box process, and I think laying out really clearly what exactly is going to happen over what time frame, what processes are in place to prevent bias and things like that from creeping in. Are we having I've totally forgotten the C word, that's calibrations. That's the one that's come back to me. Calibration processes to ensure that we are free from bias, but without necessarily having to go into, here's what our budget was for the compensation review cycle, but here's how it was applied. Here's the areas that we felt needed the most attention, and here's how we ensured we kept ourselves accountable to that. You can do these sorts of things and share percentages and high-level stats in a way that show people how you're investing in their success, without necessarily having to say, Matt got $1,000 pay increase, or whatever that might be. So there's, again, some really straightforward sort of tactics that you can implement. Yeah,
amazing. A lot of really great insights. I've got a few people raising their hands in the audience, so I want to cut over. I'm actually we've got a new setup on the webinar, so I'm gonna try something experimental, risky, I know, mid webinar, but I'm actually gonna allow people to jump in and ask the questions themselves. So I know that Catherine McKenzie has raised a hand. Catherine, I'm just going to put you on, so you're going to be able to ask the question yourself. So welcome to the conversation, Catherine. If you want to take yourself off mute, feel free to ask the guests a question. is this going to work? Was this the worst experiment ever?
This is the bold bet.
Bold bet. I'm not sure.
Catherine, calling Catherine.
Calling Catherine. Okay, no problem at all. Take that off. I'm going to say to anybody who wants to raise a question, please do pop it in the chat. I know we're actually going to kick off a poll in a second, but I think there's some fantastic resources that are obviously available to everybody. There's so many great points that have obviously been, talked about today. Trust is more than just pay, obviously, but it's such a foundational piece. Being able to have hard conversations, being able to lead with context, rationalization, very open conversations, I think these days that traditionally maybe a lot of us aren't used to or comfortable with. And maybe that's a component of also thinking about how we have to train frontline managers on being able to have these conversations as well. There's so many facets here which really relate back to trust. And I think also the big challenge that we find here, which we haven't really touched on, but there's a generational shift as well, right? Like every different generation, millennials, boomers, you had like 4 or 5 up there. We've got a range of different generations, all with their own concepts of what is trust and what is trust to me. And that's a difficult thing for an organization to navigate, because there's so many variables in there.
Exactly. And that's why like using simple things like personas can be really helpful, just to get your mind around who you're engaging with and how to communicate with them on a way that's really going to resonate with what their key questions are and what their expectations are.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I've been told I need to launch the poll. That's a really great question. Again, why wouldn't we use brand new technology in the middle of our first webinar? Let me see what I can do. Right. Okay, I've got the button. We're about to launch the poll. Okay, hopefully that shows up for everybody. There's a couple of questions there. We'll get a bit of a sense of the answers as we go through.
Very cool. I think you hit on a really important topic there before as well, Damien. It's just around like how you're empowering your managers. I think it's so easy to retain all of the kind of information and control and everything at a HR or a people team level, and forget that actually managers are out there getting these questions day in and day out. And it's when they aren't able to answer them that they're going to just defer to the people team. And so I think you can, again, reduce a lot of the headache and a lot of the traffic that's going to come your way as a leader of a people function if you can cobble together, some really basic speaking points around how it is that pay is orchestrated and deliver a level of transparency that comes up most frequently for people when they're joining the organization, but they've also been in it for a while and want to understand more about the reward practices and things like that.
Yeah, great. And I think, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
And I was just going to say, adding to that as well, I mean, everyone knows that if you've got managers who have a very strong view when they're going to market on, how much roles are worth, if you can really share that insight and have that transparent, trusting relationship, the buy-in just saves some more difficult challenges down the track.
Yeah, makes sense. And look, firstly, I want to thank both of you for coming today. Obviously, a wealth of experience on this topic, both from really interesting and very different angles. There's obviously a lot of insight that you both can provide. The Global Trends report that got launched today. Jess, thank you so much for coming and giving us some insight. I believe we'll probably be emailing out a link after this. You can go to Mercer also to get the downloads. I'll certainly be having a look at it afterwards. And Matt from Foundation, a fantastic consultancy that can help answer a lot of these questions from a really practical side of, being able to solve this with big global organizations. Really want to thank you both for your time, for coming along, sharing your insights. And we'll wrap today on that. And yeah, hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you so much for coming.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you.